Did you know the San Andreas Fault hasn't had a major earthquake in over 160 years? That's right. This massive fault line, which runs through California, has been building up pressure for decades, and experts believe that it's about to crack. But what does that mean for millions of people living in Southern California? What will happen when this ticking time bomb finally cracks? In today's video, we're going to break down everything you need to know about the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault is one of the most famous and feared fault lines in the world, especially for those living in California. It's not a new thing to hear about the possibility of an earthquake along this fault, but when a seismologist like Thomas Jordan says the fault is locked, loaded, and ready to go, it grabs everyone's attention. For many, this statement sounds like the beginning of a disaster movie, but the reality is even more serious. To understand why experts are so concerned, we need to look at the history of the fault. The southern part of the San Andreas Fault, which runs through Southern California, hasn't experienced a major earthquake since 1857. That's over 160 years of stress building up between the Pacific and North American tectonic plates. These plates are constantly moving, but they don't move smoothly. Instead, they get stuck, and the pressure builds until it finally releases in the form of an earthquake. The longer it takes for the stress to release, the more powerful the earthquake could be when it finally hits. Other parts of California have already experienced big earthquakes, like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.8, and the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, which had a magnitude of 6.9. But the southern section of the San Andreas Fault has been unusually quiet. Many experts believe this quiet is the calm before the storm, and they expect the next earthquake could be massive. People refer to this potential earthquake as the Big One. So what exactly is the Big One, and how big could it actually be? When people talk about the next major earthquake along the San Andreas Fault, they're often imagining something straight out of a disaster movie. But is that really possible? Let's break it down. In movies like San Andreas, the fault is shown producing a massive earthquake with a magnitude of 9.0. That's an insanely powerful earthquake, and while earthquakes of that size do happen in other parts of the world, it's unlikely to happen along the San Andreas Fault. The reason for this is simple. California's tectonic situation is different from places like Chile or Japan, where a process called subduction takes place. In subduction zones, one tectonic plate is forced under another, which can cause much larger earthquakes. The San Andreas Fault, however, is where two plates are sliding past each other, and this limits how big the earthquake can be. Recent predictions suggest that the maximum earthquake along the San Andreas Fault would be around an 8.0 in magnitude. While that might sound like it's not much smaller than a 9.0, the difference in energy is huge. A 9.0 earthquake releases 32 times more energy than an 8.0 and 1,000 times more energy than a 7.0. So while California probably won't see a 9.0 earthquake, even a 7.0 or 8.0 could still cause a lot of damage. Experts estimate that there's about a 7% chance of a magnitude 8.0 earthquake happening in Southern California in the next 30 years. Meanwhile, there's a 75% chance of a magnitude 7.0 earthquake happening in that same time period. In other words, while the Big One might not be as big as some Hollywood movies make it out to be, it's still something people need to take seriously. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about the San Andreas Fault is the idea that it could cause a massive tsunami, like in the movies, but that's not really possible. The fault doesn't run under the ocean, so when it does slip, it won't displace water in the way that would cause a tsunami. However, that doesn't mean California is safe from other kinds of destruction. California probably won't experience a 9.0 earthquake. The potential for a 7.0 or 8.0 earthquake is very real. And even though the energy released in these smaller earthquakes is much less than a 9.0 earthquake, the damage they can cause is still significant. So, while Hollywood might exaggerate what could happen, the reality is still something Californians need to be prepared for, because the movement is enough to cause significant destruction, especially to buildings and infrastructure that are directly on or near the fault. Fortunately, because of the 1972 Alquist-Priolo Earthquake Fault Zoning Act, California has strict laws that prevent new buildings from being constructed too close to known fault lines. But that doesn't mean everything is safe. Even though modern buildings are built to withstand earthquakes, there are still plenty of older buildings that aren't as sturdy. In fact, experts estimate that the total cost of damage from a 7.8 earthquake could be around $33 billion. And that's not even counting the fires that are likely to break out when gas mains and water pipes are damaged. In past earthquakes, like the Northridge earthquake in 1994, fires caused even more destruction than the shaking itself. One of the scariest parts of an earthquake is that the damage doesn't end when the shaking stops. After a major earthquake, there are usually aftershocks, which can range in size but are often powerful enough to cause additional damage. For example, after the 2011 Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand, the region experienced more than 10,000 aftershocks. That means even if a major earthquake happens, people in Southern California could be dealing with the aftermath for months or even years. But California has learned a lot from past earthquakes, like the Northridge earthquake in 1994 and the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. After each of these events, the state implemented stricter building codes, requiring new structures to be built with earthquake safety in mind. In addition, older buildings are encouraged to undergo retrofitting, which means adding extra support to make them more earthquake resistant. These measures have definitely made a difference, but they're not foolproof. One of the biggest challenges California faces is the fact that a lot of its infrastructure is old. Roads, bridges, and power lines weren't necessarily built with major earthquakes in mind, and even with retrofitting, they can only withstand so much. For example, after a major earthquake, it's expected that many roads and bridges will be damaged, making it difficult for emergency services to reach affected areas. Power outages are also likely, as the shaking could damage power lines and transformers. Another issue is water. Many of California's water pipes are old and could break during an earthquake, leading to widespread water shortages. In addition, fires are a major concern, as damaged gas mains could ignite and spread quickly, especially if firefighters don't have access to enough water. Lastly, there's the human toll. While experts estimate that around 1,800 people could die in a major San Andreas earthquake, the real number could be higher, especially if fires, aftershocks, and infrastructure failures compound the initial damage. Thousands more could be injured or displaced, with many people losing their homes. Hospitals could be overwhelmed, and emergency services could be stretched thin. That said, California has a robust emergency response system in place. The state regularly conducts earthquake drills known as the Great California Shakeout, where residents practice what to do during an earthquake. The idea is to drop, cover, and hold on to protect yourself from falling debris. These drills help people prepare mentally and physically for what to do when the ground starts shaking. In terms of predicting earthquakes, though, things get a bit trickier. While scientists have gotten better at understanding how earthquakes work, there's still no reliable way to predict exactly when one will happen. That's why it's so important for residents to be prepared at all times. First and foremost, having an emergency kit is key. Your kit should include enough supplies to last for at least 72 hours. Some basics include water, 1 gallon per person per day, non-perishable food, a first aid kit, flashlights, batteries, and a battery-powered radio. Securing your home is another important step. California building codes are strict, But if you live in an older building, it may not be as earthquake resistant. Consider having your home retrofitted to reinforce walls and foundations. It's also a good idea to make a family emergency plan. Know where you'll meet up if you're separated when the earthquake happens, and designate an out-of-state contact to check in with, as local communication networks might be down. Another great way to prepare is to sign up for earthquake alerts. Apps like MyShake and services like Shake Alert are designed to give you a few seconds of warning before an earthquake hits, which can be enough time to protect yourself. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more important updates like this. Also, let us know in the comments. What are your thoughts on the San Andreas Fault, and are you prepared for the big one? We'd love to hear from you.